Good afternoon. My name is Kay Jacobson. I'm the History and Current Events Coordinator of the Ramsey County Libraries, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Tuesday with the Scholar. Today, we will be talking about financial fraud and scams, with our speaker being Marti DeLiema, and you're going to have to correct me on this, Marti, because I know we didn't get a chance to talk. I was out of town for this 4 days. And a few things about Marti. She has a PhD in gerontologist and an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Minnesota. An important component of aging well is avoiding financial abuse and fraud. Yet victimization causes millions of Americans to become financially fragile in older age. So she uses both quantitative and qualitative research methods and studies financial victimization using focus groups, in-depth interviews, surveys, and panel data. She regularly collaborates with financial institutions, AARP, and the FINRA Foundation and federal protection agencies to analyze victimization risk factors and to test efforts to inoculate consumers from fraud and abuse. Through enhanced consumer education and advanced care planning interventions, her research is funded by the National Institute of Justice, the National Institute of Aging, the Social Security Administration, the Administration for Community Living, AARP, and the FINRA Investor Education Foundation. And it is my great pleasure to turn things over to Marti DeLiema.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marti DeLiema from the University of Minnesota School of Social Work. I am a subject matter expert on fraud and financial exploitation. I look at this issue, it's a societal issue, but it also does disproportionately affect our aging population and older adults. I'm also the Fessler-Lambert Chair in Aging Studies at the University of Minnesota and the Associate Director for Education for the Center for Healthy Aging and Innovation. So I have a very mixed background. I am a gerontologist, but I have a postdoc in developmental psychology and currently work in a school of social work. So I consider myself an interdisciplinary scholar. And I'm really driven to understanding this issue related to financial abuse and fraud. So in this talk, I'm going to share with you some of the latest trends in scams and persuasion tactics. I want you to understand some of the risk factors for victimization and the risk factors associated with susceptibility to fraud. I also want this to be a learning opportunity for folks. We find that forewarned is forearmed. So I hope that by the end of today's session, you know how to protect yourself from scams and from financial abuse from people in your own social networks, and also have some tools for how to help when someone you know or love has been a victim of a scam or a fraud. So I want to clarify some really key terms before we dive into the content. And when I talk about elder financial exploitation, I'm really talking about two different types of crimes. So one is the main one we'll focus on today. That's fraud and scams, where the perpetrator is someone who's a stranger. They may, over time, develop a trusting relationship and a very interpersonal, close relationship with the victim, but they started out as a stranger. We can contrast that to financial abuse. This is where the perpetrator is someone who already resides in the older adult's close social network. So the perpetrators in these cases are typically adult children or grandchildren, other relatives, neighbors, roommates, and others who kind of act in a fiduciary role, such as a financial advisor or even an attorney. So we see cases of financial exploitation happening by all of these different perpetrator types. But when I talk about these two issues, I'm really trying to differentiate between abuse by family members and friends, people we already know, and fraud and scams that are today mostly perpetrated by transnational criminal organizations. So let's first talk about the category of abuse by family members and friends. What are some of the risk factors here? So when we look at the data and we looked at who's look at who's experiencing financial abuse, we find that cognitive impairment is a big risk factor. So is disability and dependency from the older adult. So as a person becomes more frail, maybe has less decision-making autonomy, less control over their own finances or financial decisions, we might see some bad actors, adult children who have no business being the ones responsible for money management, trying to take control of the older adult's finances. So related to that, social isolation of the older adult is both a tactic and a risk factor in these types of crimes. And sometimes when we look at these types of cases, we say, it's really not the characteristics of the older adult that are predicting who's a victim of financial abuse and who's not. It's who's around them. So perpetrator pathology. Does the perpetrator have gambling issues, mental health issues, substance use? All of those often contribute to financial abuse. And then, of course, these experiences happen within family systems typically. So dysfunctional family dynamics and feeling sense of entitlement, all of that plays a role in exploitation by abuse by family and friends. I also think it's important to look at this issue from the 3,000-foot view. So we also have these underlying currents in our society of extreme ageism. So these crimes maybe are considered civil matters that are within families rather than the criminal issues that they are. Also, we have a major generational wealth gap in our country. About older adults hold about 70% of our nation's privately held wealth. And people are living a lot longer. So there may be some feelings of entitlement among younger generations to that wealth. So what traits are common, among the perpetrators of financial abuse? So we find that perpetrators tend to lack empathy. They can be manipulating, controlling, have that sense of entitlement, be deceitful. And then again, some of those other underlying issues like alcohol and substance use and mental health concerns. So if you have individuals in your own social networks that have these characteristics, I'm going to talk about at the end of the presentation today, that we need to think, you should think deeply about who you would trust as you age to help you manage your finances, and creating a system of tools and protections so that the family members who might be the most interested in your finances are not legally appointed to be able to access your finances. So we'll talk about that at the end. So now let's shift our focus and talk about scams and fraud. So when I talk about scams, I want to make one thing very clear. All of us at any age are susceptible to fraud. There is a scam out there designed for each and every one of us. However, we do find that older adults and aging might be associated with certain characteristics, such as social and cognitive conditions that can increase vulnerability. So this is a both and situation. Older adults and younger adults are experiencing fraud. They're reporting fraud to organizations like the Federal Trade Commission, but they might be experiencing different types of scams, and the consequences are experienced differently. So let's think about some societal level trends that might be accelerating some of the trends we're seeing in exploitation. So first, I want to say that older adults, so that is defined as people age 65 or older, currently outnumber children and teenagers combined in the state of Minnesota. And it's our oldest residents, so people who are 85 plus, that are growing at the fastest rate. So we are an aging society, an aging population, like many other parts of the world. The second societal trend that is kind of boosting the prevalence of financial fraud is the wealth of the older generation and the shift from defined benefit pensions, so your typical company pension that was really common, 40 years ago, to now we have more defined contribution pensions like 401ks and 403bs. So first of all, as I said before, baby boomers hold a lot of our nation's wealth, 78.3 trillion. And those assets will eventually start changing hands, right, to millennials, Gen Xers, and even Gen Z. So, so if you're a criminal and you're thinking, well, who do I want to target for this crime? Am I going to go after the broke college student or the wealthy baby boomer? And I think that's an easy decision for a lot of criminals. And then the issue with the shift in our retirement savings is that 403B and 401k plans are way more accessible to you as the retiree, as the owner of that retirement plan. So if it's a pension where you would get a monthly check, you can't dip into the whole fund of that company and take out more of your, future, reserves or pension payments. But that's not how your 401k and your 403b work. That is, a sum of money held in an account that you could potentially access. So criminals are finding that these are much more accessible. And once they've tapped a person out of their checking account and maybe savings account, the most accessible funds, they're even manipulating people to basically liquidate their retirement savings as well. And again, that's something that's not possible with something like a Social Security check, which again, you don't have access to the whole Social Security fund. And it's not possible with one of those traditional pensions where it's just a regular check every month. So those are kind of societal big factors that might be contributing to this issue. But there's also some personal, individual level characteristics as well. One is the incidence of dementia and cognitive change as we age. So the good news is that dementia is not universal, but some cognitive decline is as we get older, especially in financial decision-making and health-related decision-making, which is unfortunate because those are really critical skills and aptitudes to have as we age. So this is some data from researchers at Rush University in Chicago, and they followed the same people over time in a study. And every year they would administer a really big neuropsychological test to determine their cognitive functioning. And when adults entered this study, they were already in older age, like in their late 70s. And they found that the majority of their sample, 78%, showed very little change in cognitive functioning by 7 years after being in the study. So these people were in their mid 80s, but 22% did have dementia. So beyond mild cognitive impairment. So that's good news. The majority of the sample is aging, was cognitively healthy, no pathology. But there's something really critical that's missing from that study, and that is other areas of decision-making that are affected by the aging process, but that don't necessarily fall in line with the incidence or experience of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So decision-making is our ability to understand and evaluate competing choices and really pick the most optimal choice based on a series of factors. So the same researchers at Rush University administered a health decision-making tasks and financial decision-making tasks. And they found that 30 to 40% of participants in their sample who were cognitively healthy, so aging along this top curve here, this normal aging curve, these people were making suboptimal financial decisions. So that is a major concern. Here's another study that looked at people of different age groups, and they administered a financial literacy quiz. Only had 5 questions on it. One example question is, what's riskier, a stock or a bond? And the blue line here, the blue dots, that represents the average performance of financial literacy for adults of these different age groups. The top line up here, the red squares, after every question, the researchers asked, how confident are you that you got that answer correct? And you can see this widening gap between perceived financial literacy up here and actual financial literacy down here. And my assumption is that this gap, people who think they're on their A game but are really not performing well, that's a major target for fraud criminals, because these are the people that are not necessarily seeking assistance from friends and family members with managing their money. They might not be going out and getting financial advice from trusted providers. So again, it's kind of this lack of understanding or insight into your own financial decline as you age. But again, these are not totally universal, but there are cognitive changes associated with financial decision-making that we might experience in very late age. So another risk factor, putting the cognitive and brain health risk factors aside, is social isolation. We saw social isolation kind of go, up through the roof in the COVID-19 lockdowns and pandemic, but some of those trends are still persistent. So about 27% of older Americans live by themselves. That percentage is growing. More than 50% of US adults are unmarried. There was a statistic from a couple of years ago that millennials are more likely to live with their parents than they are to live with a partner. And the majority of US adults don't participate in social groups or clubs or faith-based organizations. And then if we think about the subjective feeling of being socially isolated, it's loneliness. And a third of adults ages 45 and older report feeling lonely. So these are statistics from AARP, as well as the University of Michigan's poll. So those are kind of social and cognitive factors. But the one thing I don't want to skip over is life events. So some life events are more common to experience in older age, like widowhood or the onset of a disability, retirement, maybe downsizing. All of these create kind of a disruption in the routine. And these, and from my research, I found open up kind of doors for criminals or for certain persuasion messages to be more effective. So ways to earn some income during retirement, or to help a loved one get out of trouble. So again, we can't just think about, oh, it's just your personal characteristics or the social factors. It's also just happens to be what's going on in your life that can create a window of opportunity for those criminals. So I want to switch now to talk about the latest trends in scams. Here are the most common frauds affecting older Minnesotans. We see a lot of imposter scams. That includes romance. It includes government imposters like the Social Security Administration, the FBI, the Federal Trade Commission. We also see online shopping scams, fake prizes, sweepstakes, and lotteries. Maybe that's a letter or a text message. It says, hey, you won a bunch of money, but first you have to pay the taxes or, contribute something to a transportation cost. And then we're also seeing investment scams. The growing investment scam right now is the romance to crypto. So it starts out as a friendship or a romantic connection that you might have with someone online, and then they convince you to invest money in cryptocurrencies. But the reality is it's all smoke and mirrors, and you're just transferring money directly to these people. In terms of, so scams and the persuasion methods that criminals use are roughly consistent over time. We don't see a tremendous amount of variation in persuasion tactics, but we do see changes in the identities that scammers pretend to be, like who they are pretending to be, and the money transfer mechanisms. So back in 2019, wire transfers were associated with the greatest amount of loss. But now we're seeing a lot of push into cryptocurrencies, even cryptocurrency ATMs. We also see a lot of scams involving gift cards and prepaid cards, and more we're seeing bank transfers. So, direct checking to checking accounts. And then also there's new, Cash App, Venmo, all of the peer-to-peer financial transfer apps. So there has been some very limited consumer education around avoiding gift card scams. This is a photo that I took, I believe it was at a CVS, that was trying to forewarn people to not buy gift cards when they're told to from someone over the phone or by email. if you can zoom out and see, what this looked like in comparison to the many, many, many cards on this rack, that consumer education, although I think it's worded well, was too small, was really, really too small, not noticeable enough to really substantially change someone's behavior or get them to notice it if they're being told to go buy a particular card. Plus this is a very long gift card rack, and that was only placed in one little area. So gift cards is one area. Another big area for fraud right now is cryptocurrency. Again, some of the biggest dollar losses that we see are in cryptocurrency scams. Sometimes these are, the premise is around an investment, like you're investing in a cryptocurrency, but in other scams, you're just using that as the mechanism for money transfer. So it's kind of being used by criminals in two ways. Here's a comparison of consumers' reported losses using different money transfer mechanisms from 2019 to 22. And you can see the huge increase in crypto and bank transfer. We're actually not seeing really big increases in the number of reported scams since about the pandemic. So 2020 to 2024, if we look at the Federal Trade Commission's data. But where we're seeing huge increases is the amount of money that's being stolen per person. So average losses have increased, even if rates of victimization, at least self-reported victimization, have remained roughly the same. So I just want to go into a couple of scams. The most common is imposter scams. So again, I talked about fake lotteries, charity frauds. Some people receive calls. They think they're talking to an executive at Publishers Clearinghouse. And they get, explanations like, oh, you used your card at Target or at your grocery store, and that's how you were entered into the sweepstakes. Sometimes the caller or the email will come from a law enforcement agency. A lot of times we're seeing hybrid scams where it might have started out as a tech support, thinking that you're on the phone with Microsoft, and then they tell you that your computer has been compromised by a much broader criminal network and that they need to patch in the FBI or, the Homeland Security. So these hybrid scams are increasing in popularity among criminals. Another big one is called the grandparent scam. It's a family emergency or a virtual kidnapping scam. Family, you get a call, sometimes really late at night. You learn that a family member of yours is in trouble, and the only way to help them is going to buy gift cards or transferring money some other way or putting some cash in a cryptocurrency ATM. Again, bank imposters, online dating. I have a lot of participants in my research who were not aware that online dating websites are riddled with scammers on them to try to attract individuals who are looking for companionship. And then, of course, the tech support scam, where you might get a message on your computer, a pop-up that says your data has been compromised, or you have a virus, and to contact Microsoft support or Apple support. So some interesting trends here in terms of the prevalence of business imposter and government imposter scams. You can see these huge peaks in the orange line here for government imposter. This really corresponds, this first peak right here, to the IRS imposter scam. That was really popular back in 2019 and early, so in 2019. But then criminals started switching their tune, and instead of being the IRS, they decided that they would have more luck if they switched to pretending to be the Social Security Administration, saying that you are a victim of identity theft. The story was roughly consistent. It appears to me that the criminals were operating off of a script, and they usually operate out of call centers in other countries. But then we see this huge nosedive here. Some of this corresponds actually to COVID-19 lockdowns. The criminals themselves had to learn how to move their operations to work from home environments, but then they got right back up and running. More of us were home. There was a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear in the world. So again, they had a lot of success. But instead of pretending to be the government, they said, you know what? With everyone having to work from home and basically live their life remotely and not shop anymore, we shouldn't be the government. We should be Amazon because everyone's using Amazon now to order goods. So there's a lot of fake shipping scams, you know, so kind of move from pretending to be the government to being a consumer retail company or a tech support company. And now it's hybrid. They're pretending to be all of the things all at once. So those are some of the biggest trends. And I know I was very cursory. There's many, many other very specific scams that I didn't even talk about. Criminals, we feel, tend to stick with a particular storyline, perfect that storyline, and use it on as many targets as possible. Sometimes scams are so tailored to particular demographic groups or to even occupational groups. I've seen scams intentionally targeting just pharmacists, that it's almost unbelievable how much resources they put in to creating really compelling storylines. But that only work for a certain very, very small sliver of our population. But they know that if they can be really credible and work up those stories and kind of test them with a number of people, it can be more effective. So I want to talk about the costs. What is fraud costing us as individuals, and what is it costing society at large? So if we look at age, now this is only reported fraud. So what's missing here is the many, many, many millions of us who experience scams, who have money stolen from us in scams, but never report it to any federal or state or local agency. So what you'll notice is that adults 80 plus typically report significantly higher losses relative to young and middle-aged adults. So something's going on among the older adults. Either they have more money, they have retirement savings, so the criminals are able to extract more money from these individuals, or the scams are lasting longer. So it might start out with just a couple $100 here and there, and then escalate to much more until someone intervenes or the person recognizes it's a scam and decides to report it. Financial losses aside, and you know, overall losses estimates range just for older adults somewhere between, you know, $4 billion up to $48 billion per year in direct financial costs just to older adults. To all of us as a society, it's closer to 100 and something billion dollars. It's a lot, and those dollar amounts are increasing. So financial costs aside, I'm also deeply concerned about the emotional and social cost of victimization. So when I interview victim survivors of scams, they talk about their concern about their financial security. They talk about the loss of the dream that they had of how they wanted to spend their retirement and how now their retirement is going to be dictated by what they can afford. Some people lose their independence, you know, others find out, or that people feel that they can't manage their finances, so they, you know, lose that financial autonomy. Some people experience legal and credit issues, especially if the perpetrators opened up new lines of credit. There's a lot of shame, a lot of depression. Sometimes there's tax issues if, like, they liquidated their financial, their retirement accounts. And then a lot of the victim survivors I interviewed talk about how it was a trauma. And in some of the data and the consumer complaints I've read, people have talked about trying to take their own life after they've been a victim. So really, really severe social and emotional impacts as well. So there's so much self-blame in scam victimization. This was a quote from one of my research participants. She said, "Genuinely, I feel ashamed still to this day about it. It wasn't like shock. It was like the part of my mind that was yelling at me the whole time finally was aligned with my consciousness or whatever. And so it just suddenly all the kind of came forward as a realization. And I just felt blank and obviously felt very dumb about it. But the shame is the thing. I didn't want people to find out that this had happened." In some of my research interviews, it's that person's first time talking about what happened. And, they said, I'm going to tell you about it, but I'm not telling my children, and I'm not telling, my friends. I don't want people to judge me. I already feel bad enough about it. So how do the criminals do this? How do they convince us to part with our money or think that what they're saying is legitimate? So scammers use social engineering tactics. Some of these include emotional arousal. So they get us into a state where we feel really excited, really happy, or alternatively, deeply fearful, and really scared and uncertain. And I'll talk in a little bit about how emotional arousal actually causes us to bypass our kind of deeper, more rational thinking brain to just go straight to agreeing with the criminal. They also make the situation seem urgent. They put a lot of pressure on their targets to act now. This deal's not going to last, or, if you don't act now, your child can be harmed. Lots of different uses of urgency. Phantom fixation is when the criminals will kind of conjure up a fantasy of usually wealth, luxury, power, prestige. I was looking at one mail scam. I think it was a sweepstakes scam that came through the mail, and it told the recipient that they won this really fancy Mercedes. And they said to the person, you better go out into your garage and measure the length of your garage door to the back of the wall of the house, because this car is a boat. This is a huge car, so you should go and make sure that it will fit. And all of this was just designed to get the person more emotionally invested in receiving this big windfall. So we see this a lot with romance scams, conjuring up these fantasies of when you'll finally be together in person and what your life is going to be like. Most criminals, especially the government and tech support, and I should say business imposters, use false indicators of authority and credibility. They might give you their badge numbers, which is all just fake, or send you fake pictures of driver's license or passports. Criminals also work really hard to isolate you from potential interveners, people who are going to try to help. In my interviews with victim survivors who were experiencing the gift card scams, many times they were face to face with a retailer, like a clerk or a cashier, and the clerk would say, I think this is a scam. Like, I think you need to stop. And the criminal would be, on the phone with them still, or on their earbud, and would say things like, don't tell them, this is what you should say. So literally coaching them line by line for how to lie to these interveners, like bank tellers, family members, because they know that the moment that someone can break the ether and break the spell, the whole scam will come crumbling down and they'll not be able to extract any more money from that person. So isolation, again, is a major tactic used by criminals. And that kind of goes line in line with the next one, is establishing this private and confidential interaction. My romance scam victims are sometimes told, oh, don't tell your adult children about us. They'll never understand, and no one loves you like I do. So a lot of gaslighting and a lot of grooming over time. So I told you that emotions are really powerful, and they really impact our ability to make reasoned decisions when we're in a highly emotionally aroused state. So maybe we're feeling, like I said, really excited about something, or we are threatened and we're feeling at risk. So when, according to something called the elaboration likelihood model of persuasion, when we receive a really powerful but emotional persuasion message, instead of being processed, that information, by our kind of rational part of our brain, the part that like really deeply interrogates information, relates it to prior knowledge that we already have, thinks about consequences and benefits, it bypasses that and goes straight to the more heuristic part of, fast processing of our brain. So we process that information more superficially. And it's more, when we process information this way, it's more likely to lead to agreement. So whatever the criminal has told us, if they've got us into an emotional state, we're more likely to believe and agree with it. So here's an example that from a quote from one of my participants who said, and they were basically saying there was a warrant out for my arrest and the cops were on their way. They were on their way to come get me right then and there. So this really shows how, fearful this call made him feel. He thought he was under arrest for missing jury duty. And he, went and bought $400 in gift cards and read the numbers to the back to the criminals. And he said if he wasn't feeling so stressed, he wouldn't have, followed through with those instructions. Another participant, this one, it was a tech support scam. She said, so I was working online on my computer and all of a sudden the screen froze and there was this loud noise. It sounded like when your smoke alarm goes off, but coming through a foghorn. It was really, really, really loud. And then there was this red flashing light. It came onto my screen that said, your computer has been hacked. Contact Microsoft support immediately at this number, which I did. So, this person, she said she even closed her laptop, but it was still making, like alarm noises. So again, this emotional state, very overwhelming. She just went through with the instructions that were right in front of her. So I mentioned that scammers, especially romance scammers and sweepstakes lottery, where it's something promising, they really work to isolate you and create this private and confidential interaction. So they might keep you, the target, on the phone for as long as possible so that you can't verify the information with a family member or friend. They can maintain the pressure. Some of my gift card victims were told that they were being followed by the Secret Service. They told the criminals their address, so they were given step-by-step instructions for how to go to the nearest Walmart or Target to go buy gift cards. Again, they're told not to tell anyone else, and they enforce this through threats, undue influence, constant surveillance. So in some of the law enforcement imposter scams that I've listened to and read about, the targets are told that if they tell anyone else, the real criminals, the ones they're told have stolen their identity, will come after them and their family members. So in terms of these imposter scams, how do the criminals do it? How do they make it so much more believable? So they might conference in the target's bank. They might they might say, oh, let me have you talk to my attorney or another investigator. So kind of a lot of handing off, a lot of passing the phone to different people with status or authority. If the victim gave the criminal information on where they live, or if the criminal already had that information, they might say, oh, I know where you live. I have a photo of your home. In fact, there's a new scam where people are getting pictures of their own houses, like from Google Maps, and said that we have information on your Google search history, and we're going to release it to your friends and family if you don't pay it. So it's kind of it's a threat-based scam. They might have their employee IDs ready, and they might even show or text fake pictures of documents to show that they're proof that it's real, or that they're real. But remember, all of that information can be faked. Just like a teenager can create a fake driver's license to get into the nightclub, criminals can easily create a fake picture of a driver's license that reflects the identity that they're telling you, but that's not really them. So to increase trust, they might say, I want to help you. I know this is really a scary situation for you, but if we're going to do that, you're going to have to, follow my instructions. So people think that the criminal is actually on their side. They might come up with fake, other entities that are trying to go after the target also. So again, I remember I said that there was in the Social Security imposter scam, they would say, the real criminals will come and get you. They'll ask personal questions. Oh, tell me about your grandkids. You said this, you said that. I want to know more. So building rapport. And then also just showing some compassion. So I've had participants in my studies that said, they let me stop to use the bathroom, or I had to go home and let my dog out. Or, I had to sit down because I have, a disability. And they said I could take a seat and sit for a little bit until I recovered to go and then buy more gift cards. So just when we think we have maybe a more of a grip on what's happening with fraud and who the perpetrators are and how they're, using all new technologies and money transfer mechanisms to steal from us, a new player comes into the game, and that's generative AI. So I'm concerned about AI because it can, it has a lot of capabilities that the old way of doing scams was limited in. So let's just start out with some examples. So usually when I give a talk like this in person, I have the audience raise their hand, but obviously since I can't see any of you, I'll just ask it and you can do it solo. So the question is, which of these photos is really me? Is it A, B, C, or D? Which of these is my profile picture? So big reveal, the answer is none of these people are me. So I used an online artificial intelligence headshot service. It was $17. And within a couple hours, I got about 300 images of me after uploading some pictures of myself with headshots that I can use as my professional headshots. And when I do this, even my students who are undergraduates, are really stumped by this. They have trouble figuring out which of the following is the real me. But of course, it's none of them. So this is just to show you how easy it is. It cost me $17. I'm sure it's even cheaper. There's cheaper options to create a visual likeness of myself. And a lot less expensive than spending, $400 on a photographer, more on that on makeup, lighting, and clothes for a profile picture. So here's a way that you can all do this. Maybe not of yourself, but for free, you can generate a new face of a person who does not exist in 3 seconds. So the website that you can play around with if you'd like is thispersondoesnotexist.com. And you can select age, you can select gender, and you can select race, and it'll output artificially generated image of a person who doesn't exist. So how can scammers use this technology, and what can they do what can they convincingly fake using artificial intelligence? Well, their image, so I did it with my own image, but they can just do a random image that's generated for free. Online profile information. Maybe they use artificial intelligence to generate hundreds and hundreds of fake profiles to kind of overwhelm some of these systems. Or they just don't need to use artificial intelligence. They can write the fake profile information themselves. They can fake computer warning messages. Not even using artificial intelligence, but criminals with all the resources that they have now, they can create very convincingly fake online banking websites. So in some of the more sophisticated long-term romance scams I've seen, especially when the victim survivor is kind of feeling like this is too much and I don't trust this person anymore, they will give them access to their checking account, but it's all smoke and mirrors. It is functional and it looks real, but it is absolutely fake. Same with retail websites. You think you're on Amazon, but it could just be a copy of what Amazon's website looks like and how it functions, or the products posted on the real Amazon aren't legitimate. So official documents, a lot of the victim survivors I interviewed said, didn't really know if this person was real, but they sent me a picture of their passport. And, I have to say to them, I said, it's not that hard to ask artificial intelligence to generate a picture of a passport that looks maybe legitimate. Caller ID and phone numbers, just because your phone, you get an incoming call with a phone number you recognize, maybe the user name or the caller ID is a person you recognize, that can be faked too. So number spoofing is a really big problem because it brings our guard down. We think, oh, my phone didn't flag this as a scam, and it says mom is calling, so it must be mom. Well, guess what? It could also be a criminal pretending to be mom. And then maybe the most concerning now is your family members' voices. So artificial intelligence and just machine learning, we have now voice models of that are pretty easy to generate. It only takes a couple seconds of someone's recorded voice to create a convincing voice model. And this is being used now in multiple different scams. There's a New York Times article recently on Elon Musk often being used to perpetrate crypto investment scams. Not only do they replicate and make a voice clone of his voice, they also make his face move. So they take real footage and kind of overlay, different mouth movements, and it looks somewhat legitimate. In this particular case, this woman was at her dance studio with, I think, another daughter, and gets a call from her older daughter who was on a ski trip. And the daughter said that she's been kidnapped and she needs, the criminals say they need a ransom. Turns out they had just made a deep fake, or so a voice model of her daughter's voice, and made it sound like it was in a panic. So again, even if you're educated about these things, about voice models, it could be a scam, that moment of fear that you think, but what if it isn't, is real. So this is what makes me as a researcher in this area really concerned, is that, all of the advice that we usually give to people, if you don't recognize who's calling, don't pick it up. If it's criminals have found ways to go around all of that education and advice partially using artificial intelligence and new technology. All right, so I want to finish up my talk talking about detection and response so that you can help protect yourself and your family members and friends from scams. So the first thing is red flags. What should you look for? And if any of you are caregivers of older adults, this is kind of information I really want you to be mindful of. So if you notice changes in financial judgment, if a person seems confused about the purpose of withdrawals or is being asked to engage in any certain financial transactions that they really can't verbalize the purpose of, or that they don't understand the risks and the benefits of for them, that's a big red flag. That could mean that they're the victim or being unduly influenced. And again, this is in the situation for financial abuse by trusted others, people, friends, family members, as well as by scammers. If you notice unusual spending patterns, or maybe they're trying to invest in cryptocurrency when they never had an interest in that before, or if they're making decisions that appear to benefit someone else, not themselves. So even if, the person is saying, well, I want to withdraw money, or I want to give money to pay for my family members' college education, I think that warrants a really important conversation about, well, how will this transaction, how will this withdrawal of the money and use of it in this other area affect you and your financial security in the long run? There's also particular times of our lives that we're more financially vulnerable, like if we've experienced a recent loss of a loved one, maybe the financial decision maker in the family has died, and now the person who's living has to figure out how to manage the household finances on their own. Another thing that I notice is secrecy, being reclusive, lying, or personality changes. Those could either signal risk for financial exploitation or actual exploitation. And then having new kind of designations over the money management responsibilities through power of attorney, followed by unusual transactions. And then another one I'm noticing more and more is use of encrypted messaging platforms like WhatsApp or Telegram. So if you have a person in your life who doesn't use those types of messaging apps, they used to text, and now all of a sudden you notice that they've downloaded WhatsApp on their phone. A lot of criminals, especially romance scammers, they might start out, meeting you on Facebook or on, a dating website, but they immediately try to get the target off of those sites so that they can, their messages will be hidden, their back and forth messages. So they get the person, they instruct them how to download or install WhatsApp or Telegram. So this is such a hard problem. A lot of the transactions that we see and that financial institutions see, they look regular, or they look, or the purpose that's given by the older adult seems legitimate. So it's hard to differentiate between legitimate transactions and ones that are coerced or unauthorized. Sometimes in cases of abuse, financial abuse, the victim depends on the perpetrator for some level of care. Usually it's also the perpetrator that depends on the victim for financial support or housing. But the victim might also say, well, that's a family member or a friend. So sometimes there's a lot of denial in fraud victimization if they've built a confidential and intimate relationship with the perpetrator and they're a victim of undue influence. So they'll deny, they'll say this is not a scam, they'll push you, the intervener, out of their life instead of the scammer. It's really hard to recover money once it's lost, once it's overseas. And then finally, sometimes really intervening in these cases requires this decision. You know, do we take away this person's financial autonomy or do we protect them? Because if they're resisting intervention, if they're denying that they're involved in a fraud, they might continue to spend money or send money to these criminals. So here's your goal. If you're ever working with someone or you find out that someone that you love is experiencing a scam, especially a scam that often involves like a romance or financial windfall, something that the person is really aiming for. You want to express empathy and understanding. There's so much shame, so much stigma involved. So we want to avoid blaming words. We don't want to say, how could you have fallen for it? Or how could you have not seen this was a scam? You start with things like, I'm so sorry that this happened. I want to be there for you. Let's work this out together. And really your goal is to prevent re-victimization. So, even if you can't make them whole, how do you stop this from happening again? So you might ask the person, tell me what happened. When did this start? You might say, this is between us, I'll keep this confidential. So really building that trust. And then again, validation, that's unbelievable. Scammers are so sophisticated these days. They really, made you feel really scared in order to manipulate you. That's how it works. So to report fraud, there's 3 key places. The first is the financial institution. So if the money was withdrawn from a checking account or even a brokerage account, retirement account, that's the first place you should report. Sometimes they're able to stop the wire, stop the funds transfer, shut it down early. Also, state and local reporting. If the person is a vulnerable adult and meets criteria, you should maybe report to Adult Protective Services. So if the person has a disability, if they live in a long-term care facility, or they receive home care from a licensed provider, you should definitely report to APS. You can also report to local law enforcement, the long-term care ombudsman if they live in a nursing home. And then if it's a financial crime, you can report it to the Minnesota Department of Commerce. Federal reporting agencies for scams typically include the Federal Trade Commission. That's the kind of the biggest one. And they take all sorts of fraud and identity theft complaints, followed by the FBI. So the FBI runs the Internet Crime Complaint Center. So that's another really important one to keep in mind, especially if it was a large transaction. And then finally, there's also an elder fraud hotline. And then there's a lot of helplines as well if you're just looking for advice. So for effective communication, be patient. It can take a long time for people to be fully willing to tell the story and come to terms with what happened, especially in a romance scam. There's a lot of loss going on. There's the loss of the money, but maybe even more significant, the loss of the promise of a relationship. You should expect deflection, dishonesty sometimes. Sometimes a victim is coached to lie. And then importantly, acknowledge the emotional cost, the feelings of loss, abandonment, betrayal, lack of hope, trauma. So here's just some interventions of very last resort. One thing I'm studying here in Minnesota is temporary account holds. So if the person cannot be convinced to stop with the transactions, they can have a temporary account hold. So the money that they're trying to wire or withdraw is held in the account for just a short time while investigators take a look at the crime, more people talk to the alleged victim, and maybe family members get involved. Reaching out to family members. This is a big tool that Adult Protective Services use, kind of creating a convoy of support. Another very last resort is closing the person's bank account. So some financial institutions, this is their last resort, saying, you know what, we can't participate in something we know is fraud. We will not participate in sending money to transnational criminal organizations that might be involved in terrorism. So here's a check for the remainder of your money. You have to find a banking relationship elsewhere. We are no longer banking you here. And again, that's not a good outcome, right, for anyone. And then appointing a conservator or a guardian. So if the person is deemed to completely lack the capacity to keep themselves safe and protect their money, a judge may determine that a conservator is required. But again, that's a legal process that's challenging. It can be public, it can be shameful, humiliating for many people who are the subject of conservatorship. So that's why I say that these interventions are essential for stopping the flow, stopping the bleeding, we call it, of the money, but again, last resort. So because of the trauma of victimization, a number of organizations have started to offer one-on-one counseling to victim survivors and peer support groups for people who experienced a similar type of fraud. So these are two that I can vouch for. One is called Give an Hour, and the other is Cybercrime Support Network. They have different models, but again, the goal here is to help people emotionally recover and become more resilient in the face of financial exploitation. So I want to end with just some fraud prevention tips for all of us. In my research, I found that if you know about a specific scam before you're targeted by it, you're 80% less likely to engage with the criminal, and you're 40%, if you do engage, you're still 40% less likely to have money stolen. So knowledge is power. Forewarned is forearmed. So being here is the first step. You're learning about the methods that are used by transnational criminal organizations to harm us. You're learning about the types of scams that are out there. So hopefully this will keep you more safe when you get those solicitations, because we get them all day, every day. I mean, how many times do you get text messages or phone calls and emails from strangers, likely scams? So quick rules of thumbs. Here's some do's and don'ts. And I think if you just follow these, you'll filter out a lot of the types of scams that I find are harming our population. So one is, try to be as private as you can online. I know that's much harder to do now, and a lot of our information is out there without our consent, especially if you already are a public figure. But if you can, on social media especially, set your maximum account privacy settings. So maybe if people search for you, your name will pop up, maybe a little profile picture, but that's it. No contact information, not a whole suite of photo albums. So try to be more secure in social media accounts. If you're in an interaction with someone and you start to feel really stressed, really angry, or really excited, that is a signal to slow down, especially if there's any request for money or transaction. So again, thinking about emotional arousal and how it affects our decision-making, if you're feeling any of those, high arousal emotions, back away from the situation. Take time to think about it, disengage, hang up the phone, put it down, close out the email, whatever it takes. If you're thinking about new investment opportunities, or if you hear about investment opportunities, discuss that first with a registered investment advisor or with trusted friends or family members. Don't take the advice of people that are maybe influencing you online. Here's some don'ts. So those are the do's. Here are the don'ts. Never send money to someone you meet online or someone who calls you over the phone. It sounds like pretty basic advice, but I think what happens is we meet people online and all of a sudden they're not our online friend, they're a real person, they're someone we've connected with. So we need to kind of put up guardrails and come up with a rule. I don't send money to people I meet online or who call me on the phone. Never buy gift cards if someone tells you to, even if it's like let's say your adult daughter is heading to a wedding and she needs a gift card for the bride and groom, but she's too busy and she calls you and says, "Hey mom, can you run to Target and buy me a gift card for the wedding? I promise I'll pay you back." say no. Just say no, because with AI today, how do you even know if that was actually your daughter? We need to be extra cautious around any requests for gift cards or cryptocurrency. Don't respond to wrong number text messages. That's another scam. It might start out as like, hey, how's it going? Or even use the wrong name in the text message. They're trying to get you to engage. Ignore it. Ignore it. So another one is don't use cryptocurrency ATMs. As far as I'm concerned, the only legitimate use of those is there's only illegitimate uses for cryptocurrency ATMs. I think they're all used for financial and other types of crime. And then finally, don't accept friend requests or romantic overtures from people you meet online. So, keep your close social network of people that you actually meet, but, avoid these kind of interactions from people who don't seem to have a legitimate reason for contacting you. So other primary prevention strategies are advanced financial care planning. You really need to have your trusted agents under power of attorney named, do your estate planning. Talk with your family members about money management as you age, like who will help? When will they help? What are the signs that you might need help? Decide on a system of checks and balances. So maybe, your adult son manages the day-to-day finances, but the adult daughter looks at and manages the investment accounts, and that they have to work together so that there's some oversight there. I have a resource called the Thinking Ahead Roadmap, which I'll show you in a couple slides on advanced planning and how to get started on these conversations and how to get started on even thinking who will be your financial advocate as you age. We also need to develop safe cyber habits. So again, ignoring friend requests, how to detect a phishing email, how to look at the actual email address to know if it's, faked, and also installing legitimate antivirus software on our computers. So protect your financial accounts on all your brokerage and retirement accounts. Make sure you have your trusted contact named. You want to securely store all your checkbooks, your debit credit cards, your identifying documents away out of access to people who might come into your home, not just, future caregivers, but also, cleaners, repair people. Set up online banking for all of your accounts and mobile banking. It's a way for your financial institutions to kind of have more of a digital footprint of you, so that if something happens maybe from another country accessing your accounts, they'll be able to better detect. Their algorithms will be better able to detect that's not you, based on kind of the pattern of habits that you've set up in online and mobile banking. And then always use multi-factor or two-step authentication. So that's when you try to log in with a password online, and then you get a text message on a phone. Some companies are moving to passkey authentication, where you don't even use a password, but you use biometrics, face, voice, well, hopefully not voice, but other things to be able to access your accounts. And then talk about fraud, tell people what you learned today, and make it just part of, your news consumption habits, looking at the latest scams. Again, forewarned is forearmed. Here's some pictures from the Thinking Ahead Roadmap. Again, this is helping people think as they age on who would I trust in my life to help me manage my money if I get to the point where I can't. How do I set up kind of the legal protections and the legal tools for this person to have authority to do that? Who do I not want to be involved in my money as I age? And how do I talk about this with my friends and family members? How do I get them up to speed so that it's more of a runway? I do it myself, we do it together, you do it for me. That's kind of the ideal transition as we age. So finally, resources. Again, Thinking Ahead Roadmap, if you're thinking about power of attorney and how do you make those designations. The CFPB, the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, has great guides on how to manage someone else's money. And then finally, if you want more information on scams and fraud, I recommend the Federal Trade Commission's resources online that are available there, as well as some guides on money management. So thank you so much for your time. I am ready to take some questions.
So yeah, especially one of the reasons I wanted to book this was I became a victim of a small scam, but it was just a shopping one. And it was one of those things, it's too good to be true. It's like a clearance sale, and I'm like going, oh great, it's a website that I love and they have clearance, and it was in Facebook, and I just clicked on it and I went shopping, and I was like going, oh, all this great stuff is on clearance. And so of course you're in that happy place because all the stuff that you want is on clearance, and of course they have your size. And I'm starting to think at the end I hit and I bought the stuff I wanted. And after I sent it that night, I was like, on, that was really kind of too good to be true. And I went and checked their actual website and what they had in clearance, and it was none of the stuff that was on there. So the next day I just went to my bank, my credit card thing, and had them stop the payment. But like a month later, I ended up getting some charges on my account. And it was just, I'm like, you know what? That's probably linked to that scam. And they got my card and they sold it to someone. And so we ended up closing out that credit card and issuing a new one. But it's like anyone can easily fall for these types of things. So that's why I booked you, because I was very interested in this. So here's a short question, but maybe not so short. How many of the texts and things requesting funds for political campaigns that we've currently seen are likely to be scams? I mean, do you have any idea on?
Yeah, I think quite a few of them. I think if you're interested in donating to, a political action campaign or directly to a campaign, to just go to the candidate's website or the PAC website. Again, never respond to requests for money that come from a text message or an email.
No. Are you aware of any new or novel educational campaigns that focus on stopping scams before they start, by encouraging people not to answer calls or reply to texts?
Yeah, so the FCC has a big campaign, or it's called it, or protocol. It's called Stir Shaken, and it's basically to try to stop voice calls that are actually coming into the United States through voice over internet protocol, VoIP, where they can fake the caller ID and the phone number. And it's to hold the telecommunications companies accountable for allowing those calls to come through, so the carriers to come through. It's really complicated. I don't totally understand how it works myself, but these companies can be fined if they, and they're forewarned, they're warned, they're given lists of fake IP addresses to avoid, and things like that. So there is some, I agree that I think the best way to stop fraud is to prevent the message from getting to the consumer in the first place. So that's really important. I even think that the new, within the last couple of years, how we get the scam warning on our cell phones now is really critical. But a lot of people still use landlines. And if they're using their landline phone number, they might not see like scam likely, or or robocall or political call, but those are so helpful, and because they kind of act as an initial flag for us before we engage. Certainly our email providers, our email clients have gotten so much better at screening phishing emails. I hardly ever get an email from someone or a company, somehow I must have subscribed to it, or it forced me to subscribe, but they're not like true phishing fake scams. So again, the industry, especially, and I really wish there was more effort from social media companies and online dating companies to do more to kind of forewarn people and flag and pull out these fake profiles and fraudulent requests. But it kind of goes against their business model too. So there's kind of that issue there.
Okay, someone just shared that link, so I put that over in chat,
Right.
so you can look at that link also. Okay, in terms of like, I know it's the hard thing is to teach people not to answer the phone when, especially if they have a landline. It's like, most people have voicemail, and learning to let things go to voicemail. And are there percentages of scammers who actually leave voicemail messages, or do most not commit to leaving a voicemail?
Both, there's both. Yeah. So a lot of them don't. And maybe that's there to like pique your curiosity, like, oh, I don't know who it called, so I'm going to call back. Don't call back. It's not
Mhm.
worth it. And then some do have like a pre-recorded voicemail. It sounds maybe really authentic. I mean, the one that they're always making fun of is like, we're trying to reach you about your car's extended warranty. I've maybe you've heard those before. The Social Security imposter scam was actually a Press One campaign. So the idea was it was a recorded voice, and if you picked up the phone and you pressed one, it would connect you to a live agent. So yeah, some do leave voicemails, but that would be another indicator. Well, that's not me, or I'm not interested in that investment opportunity, so I'm not going to pick it up.
Okay. And I feel like you touched on any related work by smartphone carriers to make it harder to impersonate someone's phone number and text message. Okay, that was the rest of
They're
that.
trying. The one issue though is text message. We don't have the same amount of controls yet
Okay.
over SMS. So then as we do over phone calls. So I know there's federal agencies and efforts trying to do more in text message protection. Yeah.
So, okay, we have someone who said, I had a crypto entity take possession of my Facebook account and sent emails to my friends that I was a crypto salesman and I could never get back control of my Facebook. How would they get advantage out of this? My loss was zero, so my priority to the FBI was zero.
So I would say that in this case, you're the means to the end. You're not the end. So it's called an account takeover. So they took over your Facebook account and are trying to perpetrate a scam against your contacts. So if this ever happens to you, and I was actually interviewed for a story in Canada about a woman whose Facebook profile was hacked, and her friends on Facebook were told that she was selling Taylor Swift tickets and to Venmo her the money. And it was a Venmo, address that she'd actually didn't own. And so all of her friends were actually calling her on the phone, like, where's the Taylor Swift tickets? And she said, what do you mean? So this is really common, Facebook account takeovers, and it's very frustrating for consumers because as far as I've heard, very few people have been able to get their accounts back. Like the scammer has it, no matter how many reports they do to Facebook, getting it back in possession and knocking off the perpetrator is difficult. I would definitely recommend, if you haven't already, is resetting all your account security features and resetting your password. And if you don't have access to your password, or if they then connected your account to their email addresses, then this could be really challenging. So another thing you could do is message out all your friends, my account's been taken over. If you get any requests for investing with me, this is all a scam. That's not me. And I have found from interviewing people on the other end, like the people who have been victims of a Facebook friend scam, they have said that they wished their friend whose account was taken over had forewarned everybody because they almost felt mad at the friend, even though they had nothing to do with it. So just as a good citizen, just like reach out to everyone and say, I've been a victim of a hack. That's not me. Don't spend any money.
Yeah, and conversely, if you are a friend and you're going, why would they have Taylor Swift tickets? Or something like that, it's like, I think you've been hacked, and letting them know it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Always call first and verify.
So, okay, no questions at the moment in Q&A, but just kind of wondering what you think. I mean, like, since we've had the presidential, or just the whole election, and knowing that there's probably scams that have been happening with that, just like, do you think post-election there would still be political scamming going on? I mean, just immediately after, or is it just going to be waiting till the next cycle? Or, I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of,
Criminals will adopt the profile or the use celebrity testimonies to try to sell things.
Mm.
Again, like we saw with Elon Musk pitching cryptocurrency investments, but it wasn't actually him. So we might see more of that. A lot of times it's the next thing. So if there's so we see now a lot of scams that come up in natural disasters, targeting people who live in those hard-hit areas. And it's again, we're just so much more vulnerable in times of uncertainty. So this is a big time of uncertainty. So we're maybe more susceptible to persuasion in these moments.
Okay, somebody going back to the Taylor Swift ticket example, how would you know your account was hacked and offering tickets, for example?
So, I mean, if you don't go on and use these sites much, and you create an account, it could be really tricky to know because you don't use it. So, this person, the person that I was talking about, she found out because she was getting actual calls from people who had sent her money for the Taylor Swift tickets. In other cases, you're on and you're like, whoa, who are these people that are my friends now? And why am I having this conversation? That's not me. I'm not doing these things. So it can be different. But the other, you could just not know that you've had an account takeover. So if that's the case, if you're really kind of disengaged, I would say it's time to, close that account and cancel that subscription or whatever it is. So that way, they can't.
Less likely
Yeah.
to happen. Yeah. Do you give presentations for teens on texting do's and don'ts?
So I'm not an expert in cybersecurity. I think one issue is that we don't spend enough time educating young people on fraud and scams and the risks in the online space. And in fact, one of the biggest group of victims is young people. Buying things, clicking on links and just not having the general consumer awareness that you kind of develop over time for being a long-term consumer of things. I think, so I don't have a presentation. I think teenagers need to be really aware that what they put online can be screenshotted, captured. It can live on in infamy. It can haunt them there's a long arm to this information that they put out there. So just again, absolutely safe texting habits and knowing who's on the other end of the text message is so critical, especially with so many teenagers are victims of things like sextortion and really, really horrible, horrible crimes that result in incredible devastation for that young adult.
Are cryptocurrency ATM machines, what are they? Are they marked, someone's asking, or ID'd?
So yeah, you would know if you're putting money in a crypto. Well, I guess I don't totally know the question. I'm sure they have numbers associated with them that are in some of that the companies who issue them and place them into places like gas stations, like they literally aren't gas stations. Like I think that it should be a red flag in and of itself. They wouldn't be mixed up with a bank ATM. You would know, oh, this is a cryptocurrency ATM. The whole transaction experience is totally different. You're putting things in a crypto wallet. You don't get cash out of these things. You're putting cash in, it converts it into cryptocurrency. So the experience as a user is very different. But are they identified? I'm sure they all have, or have some sort of registration number, and that might be linked. And law enforcement is using some of that kind of back end data to figure out, how how the money is moving.
Okay. Someone had a supposed referral from a friend at the United Nations that the United Nations was giving money to old people. And they were going to give me over $300,000 if I gave them $1,200 for taxes. I told them to get it from my friend and I would repay him after I got the money. The friend said they only had 500. My friend could have easily paid the 1,200, so they disappeared. But who would you report something like this to?
Yeah, so I would report it to the Federal Trade Commission. You can report scams that you're the target of, as well as scams that you have been the victim of to the Federal Trade Commission. It'll ask you how much was lost, and you would just type in 0, but still talk about this because it gives them information on what is trending, like what's happening.
Okay.
So Federal Trade Commission, and it's, I think, reportfraud.gov.
Okay. And then, oh, someone says it can be very hard to close many subscriptions and accounts. Any recommendations on, do you go into the security measures under your account, or for trying to close things out, or
Yeah,
any?
well, subscriptions, we're motivated to close them if we're not using them, because otherwise, what are you paying for? And yeah, it can be really difficult. The FTC just tried to pass a rule called click to cancel, which was saying that consumers should be able to cancel subscription accounts in the same number of clicks and on the same platform or channel that they use to subscribe. So if it was just 2 clicks on the internet to start, a video streaming account, let's say, you shouldn't have to write a letter or call on the phone to cancel it. So there are efforts to try to make canceling subscriptions easier. In terms of accounts, like social media accounts, things that we don't pay for, maybe you're done with Twitter or X, so you can go through and say, close account. And I think those are a little bit easier. Although sometimes I have questions about, well, if I don't own that profile, what if someone pretends to be me and opens a profile that I actually have no control over? So yeah, I think we're kind of in a difficult time in society where we have this expectation to be present in all these different online environments and ways, and that people can use our likeness and our identity to perpetrate crimes that we, that we aren't even aware of.
Right. As someone says, like, how does anyone know how to close a Facebook account? They make it very hard. And I think of even people who have passed that people just, you can't close out those accounts.
Right. And one thing we talk about in the Thinking Ahead roadmap is, now again, given our big online presence, we have to give clear instructions to our family members about our many, many passwords. Think about how hard it will be if something were to happen to you tomorrow, like if you were in a car accident and someone had to log on and pay your credit card bill. Like, it's nearly impossible. And you don't want to necessarily have all your passwords pinned up on a bulletin board in your office, but again, you have to think about the people that you would trust to be able to safeguard that information and give them instructions on how to access it when it's needed, not before, but when it's needed, and to talk about what are the signs and signals that you need more assistance.
Okay, someone's saying, how about all the ads promoting calling Medicare, promising new and more benefits? Have you seen any?
Yeah, I would be really, really cautious about a lot of the phone calls and advertising and marketing related to Medicare plans. I think that these companies can be really predatory, and they wait, right as someone's about to turn 65, the messages start coming, and to really use a lot of the consumer advocacy websites to help you think about, well, was this a legitimate plan, or is this a scam? Does this actually meet my needs? Because we hear all the time, and there's a great group called the Senior Medicaid Patrol or Medicare Patrol that is really out there to educate people on selecting a plans when they're eligible for Medicare.
Okay, somebody posted something in chat, but it's a good thing. I know we can contact the Better Business Bureau for businesses that, brick and mortar businesses, but how do you know if ads on the internet seem legitimate? Is there a good site for checking websites and ads?
There's a lot of websites out there. The one that I'm thinking of is not coming to mind right now. So you definitely want to check the full web address and want to make sure that there's no spelling errors and that it's, .com, not other strange, or .gov if it's a federal website. But if it, I'm guessing you're thinking about like retail, advertisements. Even everything can be faked. Business addresses at the bottom of the website can be faked. It's just, it's so hard to know. So yeah, looking them up on the Better Business Bureau, using Google to search for the company is also a smart thing. Searching for reviews, but not within the website that you're skeptical of, but elsewhere. I think it's safe. I use a password manager. I use, to store my passwords. That way they're very long, they're very complicated. I do not know them. I do not know them by heart. But they're randomly generated, and yeah, they're all stored online. And so we're starting to get into more outside my area. We're starting to get into more cybersecurity, which is great and super important. But yes, I think it is safe to use a password manager. I use Google's password manager because I use a Google, the university uses Google Client.
So, okay, well, we are just coming up on 2 o'clock, and it has been a very informative and engaging session. We're so thankful that you were able to share your expertise with us, Marty. It's just been good conversation, I think, from the questions that people have been asking. And like I said, the video is going to be posted, and you're going to get to see all of this online. And yes, thanks are coming in too on the Q&A. So once again, thank you everyone for showing up on election day for this. And we were so glad that we were able to reschedule Marty. She had been booked for earlier in October, but had a conflict, and we were able to schedule for today, and I'm glad we could. So thanks everyone. I want to thank Grayson Simmons from Ollie for doing all the recording and checking on things for us. And I thank Marty once again, and everyone have a good day. Thanks.